During the winter of 1777 to 1778, many people struggled to keep warm and to survive the winter, while a group of soldiers struggled to stay alive and make it through the winter as well. This group of misfit soldiers would go down as being one of the greatest parts of the history of the United States. This group was led by none other than the great George Washington. During history in school, students are often given the general idea of his occurrence, but not in great detail, something that should happen. This part of history is one that shows perseverance and loyalty to an army, family, and a nation. When joining the military during this time, it was seen as loyalty to a nation and not a choice. When these young men joined the military, they did not necessarily think that it would be a walk in the park, but they most likely didn't think that it would have been as bad as it was. With record low temperatures that winter and shortage of supplies, the men that came through this winter showed themselves as heroes and men who would go down for this, do anything for this nation. In order to fully understand this winter and its severity, it is important to look at the specifics of this area. Valley Forge is located in Pennsylvania, about 20 miles outside of Philadelphia. This area of land is known as being on the cold side during the winter, and one for bad storms and better temperatures, which was no different this winter than any other. Today, of course, there's bad winter. People have enough advanced warning to seek shelter and to prepare for this weather. During this winter, spanning over the winter of 77 to 78 of the 1700s, there was no advanced weather maps or grocery stores to prepare for the bitterly cold winter. Valley Forge was an area that is now a national park and a great place to visit to look back in history. As national park, the park is open to the public to view and to be able to further look into the history of this great event in time. The park is just like any other park and operates just the same. It is one that is a great place to visit if one is interested in learning about Valley Forge. Although there are many places that were proposed for the Continental Army to camp out at, as Washington decided on Valley Forge. This place seemed at the time as a great place for soldiers to take up camp and to survive the winter, but little did they know it would also be the place where most of them spent the toughest months of their lives. This area was chosen so that they could keep the British away from the inside of Pennsylvania, and yet they could still be close enough to them to attack. The British had marched into Philadelphia that fall and most likely played a role in the reason why Washington may have chosen this area. The area was one that had lots of trees for them to use for building materials, and it also had a lot of areas they could easily see if someone was helping them to be able to have a great defense in the area. The summer of 1777 proved tough, with Washington and his army losing many battles and losing support from people. Soldiers were also at the end of their term for many, and Washington and others feared that after the winter they would not have an army. With battles being lost, the hope that a victory would happen was very slim, and the spirit of soldiers and Washington's were down, and they felt as though they were down on their luck. The place that they chose, although it was a place that was good for them to be able to guard, proved to almost be too much for them as this brutally wicked winter set in, and almost took out the army defending the United States against the British. In order to understand the army and its importance, its leader must be studied and talked about. George Washington was so much more than just the first president of the United States. He was a leader and a motivational man. To many kids, he is known as the man that cut down the tree, or for having wooden teeth, both things not important and not necessarily true. Washington was so much more than that, and he had things in his life that many people did not agree with, but he also proved to be a great leader and the right person to help the people get through the rough winter at Valley Forge. George Washington is called by man the first hero of the United States. He also, fittingly enough, was the first president of the United States as well. Washington is known as a great man with great perseverance and tenacity. George Washington was born on February 22nd, 1732, which is the current writing, and there's also another date, which is the old writing, and passed away on December 14th, 1799. Throughout his 67 years of life, Washington made some of the greatest impacts on the early years of the United States of America. He served as the first president of the United States, a leader in the American Revolution, American Revolutionary War, and many other branches in office. He has been known to many to be the father of our nation. Washington did many great things in his life, and was a great inspiration to many people, and was the right guy for the task that was on hand. As of recently, however, he is being looked down on for owning slaves and for his stand with it. This topic, like the topic of Thomas Jefferson, is one that is being hotly debated today. Slavery, of course, back then, although still wrong, was a thing that was very popular and something that was not thought to be a bad thing for most people. This, however, does not change the fact that George Washington did play such an important part in the role of America and its founding. The next thing to research when it comes to the Winter Valley Forge is to look at the conditions of the area. George Washington wrote to George Clinton in 1777 this quote: "I mean the present dreadful situation of many of the army for want of provisions, and the miserable prospects before us. With respect to futurity, it is more alarming than you will probably conceive, for to form a just idea it were necessary to be on the spot. For some days past there has been little less than a famine in camp. A part of the army has been a week without any kind of flesh, and the rest for 3 or 4 days. Naked and starving as they are, we cannot enough admire the incomparable patience and fidelity of the soldiery, that they have not been or this excited, but their sufferings a general mutiny or dispersion." This direct quote from Washington to Clinton shows the suffering and hardships that these people went through and how badly it really was. There is no better way to show the hardships than to get a look from those who went through it. Conditions for the men, as stated above, were bad. Some of them were without clothes and shoes and just getting by. Without the clothes and shoes, many of them most likely suffered from frostbite and hypothermia, a reason for many deaths that occurred during this time. Washington had to be a great leader during that time. Hardships were something that he had to take in stride, and something that he had to use to propel his men towards victory, which in the end he did. Soldiers that survived this winter survived with very little to their name, and they had to survive with hardly anything on their backs. The weather wasn't the greatest at this time, and was terrible for the people to try and live through it. It truly is amazing how many people did survive these harsh winter conditions. Other bad conditions for this time included a shortage of food. The provisions that they had with them were running low. Food and water was something that during the winter is not easy to come by, and something that the people had to conserve regardless of how much they had. They started with not a lot and ended up with even less. The soldiers during this time lived with very little and learned to live with what they had in a way most likely brought them closer together. The soldiers also did not have proper guns and other things to help them defend themselves. They had already had some rough defeats in the fall of that year, and was rough for them already, let alone with them not having proper tools to fight against the British. In order to have a successful army, there has to be proper ammunition and willpower for the soldiers and the leaders. They did not, however, have proper ammunition, and this was another thing that really was not good for the Continental Army. Another very important thing that played a role in this winter as a downside to it was disease. Living through winter during this time would already make them a risk for disease, but having the lack of food, water, clothes, and most likely medicine that they did would have made disease way worse during this time. The soldiers had it way worse during this time, and any other diseases was most likely the cause of many of the deaths that occurred during this time, with nearly a quarter of the army dying during this winter. There was also less ways to prevent disease, such as vaccinations and medications during this time, making it tougher for the people to recover if they had gotten it. The soldiers were able to build huts to stay in to help protect them from the harsh, wet winter conditions. The huts were not a lot, but they were enough to help them rest and to help them to get proper protection from snow and other natural things that happen. This was one thing that did help them in the long run with the weather. It, however, did not help them to to gain more food or more clothing. Overall, the shortage of supplies and food made it almost impossible for the soldiers to survive this winter, and the fact that they did was amazing. The victory that they had accomplished that winter, and overall, was great. This winter had have to end the war. It could have meant a victory for the British, but it did not. The Continental Army was able to rise above these struggles that were mentioned. Despite the terrible conditions, there were things that were not as difficult for them. Their families were able to help them a little bit with laundry and other things that they could help them repair or fix. There was also a few men who were able to cook quite well and provided them with nice food every once in a while. A man named Baron von Steuben came and helped the camp as well. He was able to help the camp as much as he could and bring in other help and people to help to bring in more supplies, helping the camp overall to rise above the terrible conditions that was there. Overall, the winter of Valley Forge was the victory of Valley Forge was one that would go down in history of the United States as one of the biggest winters and hardest fought the people that were there. The winter helped to set up many great things and helped Americans to become a nation that they are today.